Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Every Tribe podcast. I'm very pleased for those that are listening. Very grateful for you. I hope you're enjoying the podcast, and they will continue. Please continue to listen and spread the word, like, share, and subscribe. So, today, a very interesting subject. I do find them all very interesting because of my great love for the mission field and unreached peoples. But today is really one of my favorites. We're looking at the people group called the Siddi. Now, most people in the world have no idea that these people exist. So let me inform you, because I didn't know they existed either for most of my life. In India, there is a tribe of black people. Yep, there's black people native for, hundreds of years now to India. And they are called the Siddi people. They live mostly in Gujarat and Karnataka. In fact, I would say there's over 1 million of these people. Actually, it's listed the majority are in Pakistan, but there's much less information about the Siddi in Pakistan than there is in India. So we are focusing on the Indian Siddi today. So India-wise, they are mostly in Gujarat and Karnataka in Western India, and they are descendants of people from Eastern Africa, from the Zanj or Swahili coast. Interestingly, Zanj was the Arabic word for the Swahili coast, and that's where the name Zanzibar is, the Sea of the Zanj. We're talking about modern-day Kenya, Tanzania, and northern Mozambique. These people were mostly brought as slaves through the Arab-Muslim slave trade. And there were also some that came as mercenaries, as soldiers. They were known for their strength in fighting. Others possibly came as sailors or indentured servants, which is pretty close to slavery anyway. But there's illustrious history, actually. There were some, again, I said mercenaries, known as strong and brave soldiers in Indian history, even to the point that one was raised up as a ruler. His name escapes me, but he's there in Indian history. There's pictures of him. He's a black man with a turban on, and was a Siddi who became a ruler in India many years ago. But unfortunately, those more illustrious times of the Siddi have faded away, as there's no longer need for mercenaries and wars, and those times have passed of the empires. And so today they find themselves quite marginalized. They are discriminated against. They tend to live in small towns and villages, isolated from the general Indian population. These villages, some of them are pushed into the jungle. Probably most of them actually are on the extremes of any local ethnic Indian town. They are very marginalized in terms of education, healthcare, all sorts of things. There's a lot of discrimination because many Indians see them as foreigners, even though for generations they are Indian. They wear Indian clothes. If they're in Gujarat, they speak Gujarati. Karnataka, they speak Kannada. They speak the local dialects. There may be the odd Bantu word, but they are Indian people. They just have a heritage to East Africa. And genetic analysis is they're about 3/4 African. Some look more African, some look a bit more Indian, but they are definitely majority African heritage. Some of them even do dances for tourists, Indian tourists. They do a form of African dance and paint themselves up as a way to earn some income. There was a couple of decades ago now, there was actually a program where the Indian government realized that because of their African heritage that they were quite strong, so they started training them for athletics, and India was able, I believe, to start gaining some success in track and field, which historically it has not been successful at, because of these African origin Siddi people. Unfortunately, over time that program stopped. It gave real hope and impetus and income for these Siddi people and just structure in their lives, but over time that program ceased. I think there is talk of it coming back because I'm sure the Indian government would like some medals in track and field And these Siddi people, they have that strong African physiology to get the medals. But that's a very their history in a nutshell. They originally spoke Swahili, being from the Swahili coast. They've almost entirely lost that now. What is called the Siddi language is virtually extinct. I'd say functionally extinct. It's mostly going to be spoken in the Muslim areas like Jamba village, which is near the Gir forest in India, famous for the last remaining Asiatic lions. And religiously, they are a mix of Hindu, Christian, and Muslim. Depending on area, Jamba, I believe, is more Muslim. Then there's the more Christian, Catholic areas, and then the more Hindu areas of the Siddi. But it's really only a few words of Swahili, if anything, that they can speak. I watched a documentary on the Siddi, and there was one Muslim Siddi man, and he could say Jambo, which is the kind of stereotypical Swahili greeting. There's many ways to say, about hello, habari yako, mambo, niaje, many different ways, depending on your dialect or what type of Swahili you're speaking. But other than a few words, I don't think they really retain their original Siddi or Swahili language. But in saying that, there was great opportunity. Again, they're marginalized people. There's great opportunity for people to go in there to teach them English and to teach them Swahili. If you speak English and Swahili, I actually do. So who knows what the Lord might do, at least maybe a short-term mission trip one day. But if you do, can teach English, there's a big need. I'm sure doors would open for you to go and reach the Siddi through teaching English. And if you speak Swahili as well, even more the better. I'm thinking about East Africans, Kenyans and Tanzanians. You speak English well, you speak Swahili. You could go, and as an African person who looks like them, immediately they'll be open to you, even though I would say they do largely see themselves as Indians these days. And you could go and teach them their original language. I'm sure they would love, and there'll be hunger to relearn and have their own language again in the form of Swahili, even if it's African Swahili and not so similar to the dialect that was formed in India. But maybe naturally it will become its own dialect again. But there is great scope to reach them again. They're marginalized people. These are the kind of people that are open to the gospel. These are the sick. They're in need of the great physician. So please pray for them. I recently spoke to a Kenyan lady. I made a friend at the Christ for All Nations fire camp, and a Kenyan, East African lady with a great burden for India. She was married to an Indian man. Her son is part Kenyan, part Indian Kenyan. And she didn't know about the Siddi people. I told her about them. And she found it very interesting as an East African Swahili speaker, hearing about, her long-lost cousins who had many years ago left East Africa and been taken or journeyed to India and established there. So it's really is a fascinating subject, and I just want to quickly share one interesting story. One interesting story related to this subject. I have a friend called Daniel. He is a Gujarati man, and he's in the UK now, but when he was back in India, as a work kind of outing, they decided they were going to drive to the Gir forest to see the Asiatic lions. So it's a long journey. India's a big place, and they fall asleep. And when Daniel wakes up, he looks out the window. He looks out the window and he sees black people, and he shouts at the driver, goes, "What's wrong with you? You've driven us all the way to Africa," because he had no idea that these people existed, even though he lived in the same state. And he wound down his window and he heard them speaking fluent Gujarati, and then he goes, "Okay, I know we're not in India now." And stop blaming the driver. And that was how he discovered these people existed, purely by driving into the area, falling asleep, waking up and seeing African-looking people around him. And I'd say it's an interesting kind of side note that because they're African, the local Indians, see these people as having an affinity to the lions. So I think there are some of them that actually work in the game park with the lions because of this African origin and connection that the Indians see they have with lions, which is interesting. Excuse me, one thing I forgot is when I talk about different people groups, I normally say hello in their language. I admit this is at the end of the podcast, but for the Siddi, I could say it two ways. I can say Habari Yako for Swahili and Apke Sahin. Hindi will do for India. But let's move on to prayer points. I am not aware of any real evangelical presence amongst the Siddi, so we need missionaries out there. We need evangelists to go out there and to reach these people, to go and preach the gospel, to set up meetings, crusades, to pray for the sick, to cast out devils, to go around the Siddi areas and preach the gospel, be they missionary evangelists from overseas, be they native Indians, but we need people to reach the Siddi with the gospel, to see them saved and born again and on their way to heaven. And I would just pray as well. I mean, India, it's difficult, but an inroad would be to teach English or English and Swahili to them. So let's pray, Lord, the harvest would raise up those evangelist laborers to go with those skills, with a burden for these people, into the Siddi lands of Gujarat and Karnataka, and even into the areas where they live in Pakistan, and reach them with the gospel. They are a fascinating people. I really hope to go and meet them one day and speak a bit of Swahili to them. But please do keep the Siddi, the African people of India, in your prayers. And we want to see that little spot in heaven full of Siddi worshippers around the great throne, worshipping the living God with us. That's it for the Every Tribe podcast this week. Please do like, share, and subscribe. Great to have you listening. Really do appreciate it. Please do pray for this podcast. It will grow and prosper. Big plans ahead for all this might become in the Lord's grace and by His grace and His will. But thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.